And I am very honored today to be joined by the great Colonel Douglas Macgregor. You are one of the best geopolitical analysts that we have today. I think I read all of your writing and probably listen to one of your interviews every single day. So, Colonel Macgregor, how are you doing today? Welcome to the show.
Well, I'm doing pretty well. My voice is holding up, so I think I got another 30 minutes in me, and that's about it, Kyle.
All right. Well, my audience will certainly appreciate you being able to share your vast knowledge with us. I have a lot I'm hoping to talk to you about today, but of course, we got a half hour here. So, gonna
Okay.
just jump right into it. Tomahawks in Ukraine, Trump talking about U.S. troops in Gaza, and Venezuela, if we have time. Of course, Tomahawks, I think, are maybe the most important issue that we're dealing with. JD Vance had some remarks on this on Monday, so I want to play this clip for you, then get your reaction.
We're going to keep on walking down the pathway of peace, whether it takes us another few months, another few weeks, or God forbid, longer than that. We're going to keep on working at it. How confident am I that this is going to get wrapped up? I feel optimistic, I would say that, but the timeline is anybody's guess.
Will the U.S. give Tomahawk missiles to Ukraine?
Well, I mean, the president right now is certainly hearing that request from the Ukrainians. We know that it's something that they want. That's something the president's going to ultimately decide, but he has not yet made the decision to give Tomahawks to Ukraine.
What was the calculation in not providing those Tomahawks to Ukraine at this time?
Well, look, the President of the United States is trying to ensure that America's security is taken care of first, and obviously that means that we need to have the critical weapon systems for our own military, for our own troops. So that's what the president is focused on. And as with all the decisions that he's made related to Russia, Ukraine, he's trying to bring peace because he thinks that's what's in America's best interest. If he thinks that it's in America's best interest to sell additional weapons to Europe, he will do that. But right now, he hasn't made that decision with regards to Tomahawks.
So, Colonel Macgregor, there's a lot of talk around Tomahawks. This is presented as some kind of golden ticket for the Ukrainians to potentially win this conflict. Why are these particular munitions so provocative in such a major topic of conversation?
Well, first of all, this is an old system. I saw it used against the Serbs in Kosovo and also subsequently used by us during the previous Trump administration in Syria. It has about a 3,300 pound warhead on it with a range of 1,000 miles or a little more. It's about 40 feet in length. We have to deliver the Tomahawk from bombers or ships at sea. However, we do have a ground launched variant that was built for the U.S. Army that launches Tomahawks from trucks. The Tomahawk is not hypersonic, it is actually a slow flying missile. And as a result, it can be shot down. And I think in most cases, if these were to be used, that Russian integrated air defenses would shoot them down. So I'm not sure that it is this silver bullet, as you describe it, at all. However, there are only a few of these built for use on the ground. And it would require us to provide U.S. military personnel or contractors, former soldiers of the Army, to plan the operation and then effectively launch the missiles. That means you've got Americans on the ground doing mission planning and execution. That's not really a good thing for us, and we don't really want to do that. It is the combination of the American direct participation in the execution of the mission, as well as the use of this long range missile, most of which would probably be shot down. But if one gets through, that 3,300 pound explosive warhead would do a lot of damage. Hopefully, it would be targeted if they're going to use it at something that's military or a refinery. But the Ukrainians have frequently tried to hit nuclear power stations and civilian populations. All the things they accuse the Russians of are the things the Ukrainians actually do. So I think the president looked at all of this and said, this is probably not a good idea. And I'm quite sure that Mr. Putin said that this would be viewed as an escalatory step, and this would sour relations with Russia. And I know that President Trump does not want bad relations with Russia. He'd like to end this. There's no doubt in my mind. But he's being obstructed. He's being obstructed by the people around him on the Hill, by his European allies, particularly in London, Paris, Berlin, and Warsaw. I wish he would stop listening to them because it is not in our interest to go to war with Russia. And effectively, this is one more step in the direction of war with Russia.
Right. So when it comes to the Tomahawks, people will point out that the U.S. once fielded a variant of the Tomahawk missile that could be equipped with a nuclear weapon. And so they say that if we give Tomahawks to Ukraine, this is essentially going to give them a delivery system for a nuclear weapon. Russia will have to treat all incoming Tomahawks as if they were carrying a nuclear warhead. Do you think that's a valid concern and criticism of this policy?
Well, I think from the Russian standpoint, they have a right to be concerned. In truth, uh, we discontinued that program, and I'm not aware of any available nuclear warheads to go on those missiles. And as I said before, this would all be in U.S. hands. And I cannot conceive of any circumstances under which we would allow Ukrainians to operate this system and potentially load a nuclear warhead onto the missile. So, no, I don't think that would happen. But the Russians, nevertheless, have a concern. And they have learned the hard way, as have many other people in the world, that they can't always believe us, regardless of what we say.
Yeah. So I think I at least was breathing a sigh of relief on Friday when Zelensky came to the White House and left without a promise of getting Tomahawk missiles. And while Vance is still saying that it's on the table, this seems more like maybe Trump engaging in the art of the deal, trying to have something to pressure Putin with, something to threaten Putin with. Oh, one day we'll give Ukraine Tomahawks. But he is continuing to take steps to ramp up the proxy war against Ukraine. True, unlike Biden, he's not sending, five, six, $10 billion in weapons to Ukraine every month. But just before we went live here, there's this story from the Wall Street Journal that said the U.S. has given Ukraine approval to use Western long range missiles to hit Russian targets. And this is something, of course, that Biden allowed at the end of his administration. Trump eventually put the restriction back in place. But now they're saying it's lifted. And basically, what they're saying is that they've delegated the decision if we're going to pass the Ukrainians intelligence to use the storm shadows or attack them for targets inside of Russia to the head of U.S. European Command. And they also mentioned here that the first attacks under this were reported just recently. I think they noted on Tuesday a storm shadow hit a Russian plant. So I'm just wondering how concerned you are that Trump is going to continue to ratchet up the proxy war, even if he's not sending Ukraine unlimited number of weapons. He certainly seems to be willing to go pretty far in supporting Kiev.
President Trump has turned out to be a politician, which means that he wants to be a little bit pregnant. He doesn't really want to bring the child to term, but he'd like to be a little bit pregnant, which means he wants to make as many people as possible on his side happy. And by saying such a thing, if in fact he's granted that permission, he's cultivated his allies somewhat. The problem that I have with all of this is that the Russians are not going to be bullied. And if we continue to push this and we actually hit something that is truly vulnerable and truly important, which we really haven't thus far, the Russians reserve the right to respond decisively. And I'm not talking about nuclear weapons initially, but they have the capacity right now to hit every U.S. and NATO troop concentration, airfield, post from Lithuania all the way down to Romania. They could do that within an hour. They have that many missiles. If you engage the Russians in a missile war, it's a war of attrition. We can't keep up. We don't have the missiles to send. We can't produce them fast enough. And the Russians are operating 7 days a week, 24 hours a day. They have almost limitless numbers of missiles to hurl at us. So we would lose that battle. And right now, the NATO alliance has admitted that they can protect at most 5% of NATO territory in a Russian missile attack. Well, that's practically nothing. And that's unacceptable. And I think President Trump understands that. I hope he does. And I hope that he does not allow this to continue, because we could find ourselves at war with Russia. And if we think, or they think, that this could go nuclear, then all bets are off. A nuclear exchange would be devastating to civilization.
Yeah. Fantastic analysis. I have this short clip I want to play of you of Donald Trump talking about him thinking that Ukraine could still win the war.
Just a few weeks ago at UNGA, you said that Ukraine could possibly win the war and
well, they could.
Territory, but now
they could still win it. I don't think they will, but they could still win it. I never said they would win it. I said they could win. Anything can happen. You know, war is a very strange thing.
So, two questions here. Do you think Trump believes this? And if he does or doesn't, do you think Ukraine has any potential to win this war?
Well, I understand that pigs have evolved recently to sprout wings and fly. So my answer is obvious. It's absurd. Again, President Trump likes to talk. If you can get him to engage, he will talk. If you listen carefully, he said, well, I never said they could win. But yeah, I guess anything's possible. Well, of course, in the world, you can argue that anything is possible. But the truth is, the opportunity for Ukraine to survive this is over. The Ukrainian nation itself is at risk of going out of existence. That's the truth.
Yeah, that is a really good point, and kind of where I want to go next with this, which is it seems that Trump is engaging in the art of the deal here, right? Where he's trying to put pressure on the Russians, he's stepping up support for Ukrainians a little bit, and he's making these bombastic statements. I think Putin understands Trump pretty well and gets what Trump is doing here, and is essentially willing to call Trump's bluff. I'm not going to end the war, and you're not going to send Tomahawk missiles to Ukraine. I don't think Zelensky understands that. And so when he hears Trump say this, he's going to continue to double down on this war and think eventually the weapons will come. Eventually the West will save Ukraine. If that doesn't happen, how far do you think the Russians will go? How much Ukrainian territory will they take?
Well, keep in mind that the Russians have never been in this war for territory. They entered the war to effectively protect Russians in Ukraine, protect the population, and essentially end the oppression of Russians inside Ukraine. The Russians live on territory that for hundreds of years has been Russian. And so they have naturally incorporated these territories into the Russian state. He's had no interest in advancing any further. And of course, the Ukrainians have done him an enormous favor at our insistence. Our brilliant military leaders have advised them and pushed them to attack the Russians. The Russians set up an impregnable defense and have killed between 1.7 and 1.8 million Ukrainians. The Russians are not interested in governing or administering Ukrainians on Ukrainian soil. They would like the whole thing to end. The problem, the sticking point, is ultimately neutrality. The Russians want Ukraine to be neutral. Now, that's something that a president like Eisenhower or Nixon would have welcomed. Make it neutral. If it's neutral, we're not obligated to defend it. That was Eisenhower's argument in the 1950s. And he was right. We don't have the forces to defend the 34 members of NATO that we've got right now. It's too costly. We're overstretched. So we should welcome neutrality. But the Europeans, who are on very weak ground right now, we're talking about the globalist governments that have opened their borders, invited millions of people from the Middle East and Africa to invade their countries, and are dealing with very angry populations who have overspent and bankrupted themselves. They see virtue in continuing the war as a means of staying in power. Again, this is of no interest to us. It should not be of any interest to President Trump. He should wash his hands of this and get out. If he doesn't, there is always the outside chance that the Russians will say, we've had enough. And that means the kind of action I described earlier. There's nothing to stop them if they want to cross the river and go all the way to Poland. There is nothing there anymore. When you say Zelensky doubles down, that depends on his access to long-range strike weapons. If he doesn't have drones and he doesn't have long-range missiles, what can he do? The answer is nothing.
Right. So one question, this is something I get asked a lot, and it's partially, I think, my fault. I probably overstated before Russia invaded just how quickly they would be able to end this war. But I often hear people who are advocating giving more arms and weapons to Ukraine. They'll say, well, Kyle, You said that this war would be over in a couple weeks, a couple months at the most. And here we are 3 years into it. Russia only controls 20% of Ukrainian territory. Russia has taken some heavy losses. Ukraine is hitting refineries inside of Russia. They've destroyed Russian military equipment. Russia is, they shifted their economy to a wartime economy, but sometime all this government spending and central program is going to catch up with them. And so, is there any way to kind of explain why Ukraine has been able to not fall to Russia after 3 years?
A couple of things, Kyle. First of all, let's correct the record. The Russian economy is not in trouble. The Russian economy is thriving. It's stronger now than it was when the war began. Secondly, Russia has not mobilized for war. There are people in Russia that want to do that because they want to march to the Polish border and put a permanent end to this menace. But he doesn't want to do it. He has always been interested in limiting the war and avoiding a direct confrontation with us and the Europeans. Secondly, when this started, I was quite surprised at the behavior of the Russian forces when they went into eastern Ukraine. I expected that they would be far more decisive and organized for deep operations. They were not, because President Putin had told everyone, I don't want to kill anybody. His generals came to him and said, well, we should strike without warning and kill all the Ukrainian forces in their barracks. And President Putin said, I don't want to kill all these Ukrainians. He said, I want to live with them. They're just like us. They are Slavic Christians. And so don't do that. Go in, use a velvet glove. Avoid killing and destroying anything that you can, and will negotiate. It didn't work very well because we had built a roughly 400,000 man regular army, plus another 400,000 reservists. The Ukrainians were far better prepared, better armed than I think the Russians anticipated. But the Russians ultimately prevailed. And by mid to late April, there were talks in Istanbul. And the Ukrainians were willing to sign an agreement that would have left Ukraine with most of the territory, but would have met Russia's demands, which included neutrality. And initially, the Ukrainians did not object to that. That was refused. It was refused because Boris Johnson flew in as a representative of the President of the United States and NATO and said, don't do this. Fight. We will arm you. You will have the entire backing and industrial power of NATO and the United States, and you will win. And so Zelensky said, fine. In fact, one of the people that was part of that negotiating team, who was a real advocate for peace with the Russians, was assassinated. So the bottom line is, I didn't understand exactly what the Russians were trying to do because I didn't have access to President Putin's military guidance. We know now what they intended. Once it became clear that they were up against us and NATO, not Ukraine, Ukrainian human cannon fodder, but up against NATO's preparations, NATO's military technology, and ultimately NATO's space-based reconnaissance. When they saw that, everything stopped. And the Russians went into a completely new posture, a strategic defense. And that was set up by a general named Surovikin. It was very, very effective. And that defense was in place by the end of the fall. And that defense has killed over 1 million Ukrainian soldiers. Right now, we estimate between 1.7 million and 1.8 million Ukrainian dead. We also estimate roughly 120,000 to 130,000 Russian dead. Now stop and look at those numbers. It's disproportionately in favor of the Russians. The Russians have replaced all their losses. Whatever didn't work now works. Whatever equipment was inadequate has been replaced. And commanders who were not effective have been removed. The Russian military is in very good shape right now. That's why I said earlier, we're ready to go into a terrible winter. They say this winter will be the worst in 20 years in Ukraine. The Ukrainian energy grid is destroyed. Millions of Ukrainians risk freezing to death because of the Zelensky regime. The Russians will continue to move forward. They'll do it incrementally, but they don't want to overrun the country. It's too big. It has too many Ukrainians in it. They don't want the Ukrainians. People don't seem to get that. That's why they want to end this. The Ukrainians want to end it. I'm not talking about Zelensky. I'm talking about the people on the ground in Ukraine. There are unofficial polls that say 90% of the population has had it. He has to force people into uniform, old men and boys, to fight on the Eastern Front because they're killed within hours after arriving. This is a tragedy. We need to end it. If we care about Ukrainians at all, we would intervene and stop this. And the way you stop it is that you say no more equipment or support or cash for the organized crime state run by Zelensky. Zelensky's now worth over $1 billion in cash. Kyle, where did all that money come from?
It
We know
came
where it
from,
came
yeah.
from, right?
Oh,
We
from
should
me and
stop-
you.
Yeah, we need to stop feeding this criminal organization that runs this country. Needs to end.
Yeah.
And we need to tell the Europeans to get out. Trump is the head of NATO. That's his job. He needs to do that.
Absolutely. And I just want to really highlight a point you made there that I think is so important is you often, in myself and others, get called pro-Russian or anti-Ukraine, when in reality, we're the people who want Ukraine to negotiate the best possible future for the Ukrainians, which is to end this war and stop this senseless killing. And it's all the people who claim to be pro-Ukraine who want to send more arms, and ultimately I think a lot of them, the ones that are intelligent about, really their goal is just to weaken Russia. It really doesn't have anything to do with Ukraine, and they're willing to use Ukraine as a proxy just like they did the Afghans. And that war killed 1 to 2 million people in Afghanistan when the Soviets invaded, and I think they're willing to do just the same thing to the Ukrainians as long as it hurts Russia. They're fine and willing to do it. It's a very disgusting
Well,
policy
we
and
need to
formally
understand,
oppose it.
but Kyle, we need to understand Russia has not been hurt. These people are saying, oh, well, they don't have gas. No, that's not true. Talk to the people that have just come back from Russia. Look at the film footage. There's no shortage of fuel, there's no shortage of anything. But if this is pushed any further by us and the Russians mobilize for total war, which they could, we're in a lot of trouble. We're not prepared for that, and neither is Western Europe.
So before I let you go, I got to ask you a question about the Middle East. Of course, we got this Gaza ceasefire deal going on right now, and Trump is making all kinds of threats about Hamas needing to disarm and that countries are going to go in. So I want to play this clip from Donald Trump talking about some force going into Gaza and taking out Hamas.
Following up on that question, when you say we are going to eradicate Hamas,
Yeah.
who is we? Does that include American boots on the ground?
No, it won't be on the ground at all. We don't need to because we have many countries, as you know, signed on to this deal. The way I view it, 59 countries and unanimous. There's never been, nobody ever believed it was right. Countries that 4 months ago didn't like each other and now they're all aligned together. I mean, we've had countries calling me when they saw some of the killing with Hamas, saying we'd love to go in and take care of the situation ourselves. In addition, you have Israel would go in 2 minutes if I asked them to go in. I could tell them, go in and take care of it. But right now we haven't said that. We're going to give it a little chance, and hopefully there will be a little less violence. But right now, you know, they're violent people. Hamas has been very violent, but they don't have the backing of Iran anymore. They don't have the backing of really anybody anymore. They have to be good. And if they're not good, they'll be eradicated.
So, Colonel Macgregor, what is the potential for some international force to go into Gaza and do what Israel hasn't been able to do over 2 years and take out Hamas?
Well, I'd say the probability of that happening is in the same category as pigs evolving wings and flying around the countryside. I don't know what leads him to that conclusion, but that's delusional. No one is going to line up to go into the ruins of of Gaza, and then try to root them out. By the way, the Israelis aren't very anxious to do that either. They've had a big problem in Israel with large numbers of reservists that don't want to show up because they don't want to go into Gaza and be shot to pieces. One of the reasons the Israelis have relied so heavily on the modern equivalent of saturation bombing that we employed against the Japanese and the Germans is that they don't want to sacrifice the manpower to go into Gaza. So I don't know what the man's talking about. Now, Are there other states in the world that would contribute to a peacekeeping organization? That's a different matter. And I'm sure several have said, look, if you'll help defray the cost and provide us with the logistical support, we Indonesians, we Malays, whoever, Moroccans perhaps, who are very good troops, by the way, uh, they would be willing to go in and police the place as a peacekeeping force, potentially. But I really don't see that happening. I don't see this ceasefire holding. The Israelis have already killed 50 to 100 people since the so called ceasefire began. It's the Israelis that have no real interest in the ceasefire. They may be interested in the facade or the appearance, but they're not interested in honoring it. They've broken every ceasefire that's ever been arranged. So I think Mr. Trump is in for a huge disappointment.
So why don't you think the Israelis will commit to and hold to this ceasefire?
Well, what are Israel's goals and objectives? Have any of those been met? Goal number one is completely eradicate the population from Gaza, either drive it out or kill them all. Number one, have they achieved that? No. We don't know how many people they've killed. I've seen estimates up to 600,000. There's so many dead under the rubble, we can't possibly begin to know. They're also now trying to do something similar to the Palestinians on the so called West Bank. Those goals are enshrined as holy objectives. They can't end this war unless they achieve those. Because if they can't achieve those, their whole objective fails miserably. The whole greater Israel project dies. So that's goal number one. Goal number two, they got to get rid of Iran. Iran is the largest single obstacle on the road to Israeli hegemony over the region. The Iranians have refused to submit. The Iranians have built themselves up into a very formidable power, not for offensive purposes, but for defensive purposes. But they do have an almost inexhaustible arsenal of missiles that can be launched at Israel. We are piling whatever we can into Israel and into the region to help protect Israel, because I think we view the resumption of the war between Israel and Iran as probably inevitable, certainly unavoidable. And then, of course, you have the problem in Turkey. The Turks signed on for what they now regard in retrospect as a questionable deal with the Israelis and us for Syria. And I think there's a real danger of direct confrontation breaking into war between the Israelis and the Turks. So the answer to the question is no. I don't see any of this holding. And I think things will fall apart on President Trump.
So I guess the one aspect to that, of course, is the one man who probably has the power to constrain the Israelis is the one who sits in the Oval Office. We saw that Biden was unwilling or unable to stand up to Netanyahu and tell him that we're not going to stand for it and you're going to stop. Do you see any indication, any hope, anything that you know about Donald Trump that says he's going to do what it takes, that he will be willing to take on AIPAC, take on Benjamin Netanyahu, and publicly tell the Israelis that they will stop this or lose American support?
No.
All right. Well, fantastic answer. I think I 100% agree with you on that one. And thank you so much for your time today on the show, Colonel Macgregor. I really appreciate it. As I said, I've been reading you for years. Your analysis is particularly on the war in Ukraine. And I mean, you are one of the few people who really predicted the Russian invasion in 2022. And your analysis around that was absolutely brilliant. So thank you so much for your time on my show today. And hopefully we could do it again sometime in the future.
Okay, Kyle. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.